Have you ever seen a man cry quietly at 2 a.m. so his children wouldn't hear him? Have you ever watched your father grow old and bitter without ever saying the words, "I'm not okay"? Have you ever loved a man who seemed strong until one day he disappeared into his own silence? We talk a lot about strength, but nobody talks about the price men pay to appear strong. Nobody talks about how sadness, when swallowed, becomes sickness. Nobody talks about how society teaches boys to walk off heartbreak like a twisted ankle. Don't show weakness, don't cry, don't feel, don't break. But they do break. They just do it privately, quietly, slowly. This video is not about statistics. It's about what happens behind closed doors. When a man sits in his parked car long after he's turned off the engine. When a grown man scrolls through his phone just to feel something, anything. When your husband says, "I'm tired," but what he means is, "I don't know who I am anymore." And no one taught him how to say it. This is the grief of men. The silent one, the heavy one, the one that doesn't scream, it sinks. Comedians like Bill Burr have joked about it for years. But if you listen closely, it's not all jokes. It's confession, rage, buried sadness. It's a generation of men who were never taught how to process pain, only how to bury it. And we call that manhood. So what happens when you build a life on emotional silence? You get men who explode, or disappear, or live like ghosts in their own homes. This is not a lecture. It's not blame. This is a wake-up call. Let's talk about the pain that no one is supposed to talk about. Let's talk about the man who's tired of being strong. Let's talk about the grief that never made it into a headline but kills more men than bullets. This isn't weakness. It's the cost of pretending not to feel. Welcome to the truth behind the mask. Have you ever loved a man who couldn't love himself? Who gave everything to others, his work, his family, his friends, but left nothing for his own soul? You probably thought he was cold, distant, maybe even selfish. But what if I told you he was just exhausted, emotionally starved, running on empty for years, and no one noticed because he kept showing up? Men don't break in public. They disappear in silence. And the tragedy is they were trained to. From the time boys are old enough to scrape their knees, they're taught one lesson: don't feel, don't cry, don't ask for help. That's weakness. And weak boys don't become strong men. Right, wrong. They become emotionally unavailable husbands, silent fathers, friends who ghost you when things get hard, colleagues who smile at the office and drink alone at night. And sometimes, statistically, far too often they become obituaries with no backstory, just a sentence that says he passed unexpectedly. The sadness men carry isn't loud. It's not dramatic. It doesn't fit into a TikTok trend or a viral hashtag. It's the kind that accumulates slowly, like rust on steel. It shows up in small ways: irritability, numbness, withdrawal, shame. And because it doesn't look like sadness, no one calls it what it is. They call it bad attitude, burnout, being a man. Bill Burr has touched on this sadness hidden beneath the mask of his fury. He's screamed it into microphones and wrapped it in punchlines. He's joked about therapy, about having no emotional tools, about being raised in a household where vulnerability was treated like a disease. But if you listen closely, you'll realize it's not just comedy. It's catharsis. Burr has become one of the few men in comedy willing to stand on stage and say, "I wasn't taught how to handle my emotions, so they started handling me." And how many men listening to him thought the same thing but didn't have the words? It's no coincidence that the highest suicide rates in the developed world belong to middle-aged men, not teenagers, not the elderly, men in their 40s and 50s. the very age when society expects them to be most stable, most secure, most successful. But what if the weight of performance is exactly what's killing them? The truth is, most men don't want to die. They want to stop pretending that they're okay, pretending that work fulfills them, pretending that the silence in their marriages is peaceful and not a scream waiting to happen. But they've been told that breaking the silence makes them weak, so they carry it until it crushes them. Have you ever seen a man apologize without using words? He doesn't say, "I'm sorry," but he cleans the house, fixes the sink, mows the lawn, buys dinner. He works harder. He disappears into tasks, because that's the only language he was ever taught to. Not feel, act, not explain. Provide, not connect. And when connection is needed, when softness is required, he freezes, not because he doesn't care, but because he was never shown how to care in a way that speaks. This is not incompetence, it's conditioning. Men are told that their worth is in what they build, what they earn, what they fix. But what happens when the problem isn't external? What if the thing that's broken is inside? Where do you hammer then? What do you fix when it's your spirit that's leaking? Bill Burr has joked about this through the lens of marriage. He talks about how women are emotionally 5 chess moves ahead, how men walk into conversations already down a queen. He admits that his wife can deconstruct his entire mood with one glance, and he still doesn't know how he's feeling until 3 days later. It's funny because it's true, and it's tragic for the same reason. Men aren't emotionally illiterate by choice. They're emotionally starved by design. And here's the cruel irony when they finally try to open up. When they attempt to explain the darkness, no one knows how to receive it. Their sadness comes out wrong. It sounds like anger. It looks like avoidance. It's too raw, too late, too unfamiliar. And so people pull away. Or worse, they shame it. Man up. Don't be so sensitive. Other people have it worse. 3 daggers disguised as advice. And men hear it, loud and clear. So they go quiet again. They bottle it back up. They go back to being dependable, efficient, quietly eroding. And everyone thinks they're fine until they're not. Have you ever asked a man how he's doing and heard him say, "I'm fine," in a voice that made you pause? Maybe you didn't press. Maybe you told yourself not to push. But deep down, you knew something was unraveling behind that phrase. "I'm fine" is the lie men are most fluent in. It's the bandage they've been taught to wrap around wounds they're not allowed to have. And sometimes, by the time they tell the truth, it's too late. The marriage is gone. The connection with their children has frayed. Their bodies have started shutting down. Their minds have made the quiet decision to give up. But here's the thing. It doesn't have to end that way. It doesn't have to end in silence. It doesn't have to end in a locked bedroom door, a bottle drained at midnight, a tear held back in traffic. But for that to change, we need to stop telling men that survival is enough. Because it isn't. Survival is a slow death when you're not allowed to feel. And the worst part is, the world rewards them for it. He's strong, they say. He's reliable. He never complains. But strength without expression is a cage, and reliability without joy is a burden no one can carry forever. Bill Burr often says he didn't realize how messed up he was until he got married. Because love forces a mirror in front of you. It exposes the parts of yourself you've ignored. And for many men, that mirror is terrifying. Not because they're bad people, but because they've spent years building walls, only to realize they've trapped themselves inside. Burr speaks openly about therapy. He jokes that it felt like trying to fix a car while it's still driving. But underneath the laugh is the truth no one handed him the tools, and when he finally got them, They were written in a language he didn't speak. That's what therapy feels like for many men foreign. Embarrassing, threatening, but it's also the only way out. And still, most men won't go. Not because they don't want to heal, but because they're terrified of being seen during the process. They're afraid of crying in front of someone. They're afraid of being vulnerable and not knowing how to recover afterward. Because in their world, being cracked open means being left. Have you ever watched a man slowly disappear from his own life? He stops texting his friends. He works longer hours, but produces less. He zones out during dinner. He forgets what he used to love. He's not angry. He's not bitter. He's just fading. And no one asks why. Because we don't check on men unless they fail. We don't ask how they're feeling. We ask what they're doing. We don't say I love you unless it's buried in a joke. And then we're shocked when they break. Burr said in one podcast, "There are certain things I just wasn't built to talk about." But he talks anyway. That's the point. Not perfectly, not poetically, but he talks. And that's more than most men are allowed. This video isn't just about Burr. It's about every man who's ever sat in a room full of people and felt completely alone. It's about the father who doesn't know how to hug his son, so he hands him a tool instead. It's about the friend who ghosted you, not because he stopped caring, but because he didn't know how to say, "I'm drowning." And maybe that's the most painful truth of all. Most men aren't running away from you. They're running away from the version of themselves that never learned how to ask for help. They were praised for being silent, rewarded for being stoic, left alone for being low maintenance. And then we wonder why they implode. We wonder why they wake up one day, 45 years old, successful on paper, with a house and a family, and feel nothing. Not joy, not sadness, just emptiness. Bill Burr isn't a therapist. He's not a life coach. He's not trying to fix anyone. But through comedy, he exposes something most men only whisper to themselves. I'm not okay. I never learned how to be. And that admission, cloaked in sarcasm and wrapped in fury, is a kind of revolution. He speaks for the man who shows up to work every day and then cries in his car. The man who buys flowers after a fight but can't say I was scared you'd leave. The man who doesn't know how to grieve, so he aikus instead, because joking is the only way he's ever been allowed to feel. But grief doesn't disappear just because you laugh over it. It waits. It calcifies. And if unspoken long enough, it turns into resentment. It turns into withdrawal. It turns into a heart attack at 52, a quiet divorce at 40 to suicide note that reads, I didn't want to be a burden. Have you ever seen a man destroy the best things in his life not because he didn't love them, but because he didn't know how to live with himself? This is what unspoken sadness does. It disconnects. It isolates. And the cruelest part, it convinces the man it's his fault, that he's defective, that he's weak for needing more. So he keeps the mask on. The joke's coming, the calendar full, until one day. It's too heavy, Burr once said. I'm not good with feelings. I wasn't raised that way. And he's not alone. Millions of men were taught that same lesson. And now, they're unlearning it the hard way in broken relationships. In silent nights. In therapy they swore they'd never need. So where do we go from here? It starts with listening, with asking questions and staying long enough to hear the answer. It starts with telling men they're allowed to be confused. That sadness isn't weakness. That crying isn't failure. That love isn't about fixing everything. It's about staying while the other person breaks. It starts with one man saying, I don't know how to talk about this, and the other saying, that's okay. I'm here. It starts when we stop rewarding silence and start honoring honesty, even if it's messy, even if it's late. And in the end, maybe the real strength isn't in how much a man can endure without breaking, but in how bravely he can admit that he already has. Maybe the measure of masculinity isn't silence, or stoicism, or sacrifice, but the courage to look in the mirror and say, I was never taught how to feel, but I'm willing to learn. That's what Bill Burr represents, not perfection, not enlightenment, but willingness. Willingness to talk about his rage. Willingness to admit when he's wrong. Willingness to be laughed at for trying. He's not trying to be a hero. He's just trying to not be the man his pain was shaping him into. And if that's not brave, I don't know what is. Because the truth is, there is a quiet revolution happening. You just won't see it in headlines. You'll see it in therapy rooms, in podcasts, in whispered late-night confessions between friends who never thought they'd say the word depression out loud. You'll see it in fathers who hug their sons, even though no one ever hugged them. In husbands who go to counseling, not because their marriage is broken, but because they want to break the cycle. In comedians who wrap pain in punchlines not to hide it, but to survive it. And maybe that's all any of us are really doing, surviving our sadness until we find someone who says, me too. So the next time you see a man go quiet, don't assume he has nothing to say. Maybe no one ever asked the right question. Maybe he's waiting for a space safe enough to answer. Maybe the strongest thing you can do is just sit there and listen, because grief doesn't care about gender, and healing doesn't begin until someone says, you don't have to do this alone. So here's the question for all of us. Are we willing to hear the sadness of men before it turns into something louder, darker, and harder to fix? Let us know in the comments. What does strength look like to you? What has silence cost you or someone you love? Let's talk.